All right, welcome back to the Tank Me Later podcast, which is now part of Fantasy Basketball International. This is episode 27, where Karan Talwar is going to join me to discuss the Central Division and the fantasy outlook behind that. All right, and just as a quick reminder before I bring in Karan, sports betting has rapidly risen in popularity, and I want to connect you all with an opportunity to get started or get ahead. Having multiple sportsbook accounts is the most simple way to maximize your profits, and there's never been a better time to sign up. When you visit my page, signupexpert.com/TML, you'll be connected to all the sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. All of these sportsbooks have valuable sign-up offers for new users, and when you register through my link, you will automatically receive the top offer at each one. When you use multiple sportsbooks, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful sports betting. If you want to take advantage of these benefits and support our brand, please consider signing up for your next sportsbook at signupexpert.com/TML. Like I said, this is episode 27. Karan Talwar is going to join me to discuss the Central Division. Just a little bit about him. He started writing recently on his own page, but really for Fantasy Basketball International, has been working with us. I guess I could say us now, recently. I don't know exactly what time he started, so I'm not going to put a time period behind that, but I know he's been doing really good work. And he also has so many fantasy championships, way more than I've won in my lifetime. LOFB, FBI, I'm sure ones that I don't even know about, other acronyms. But I'm going to go ahead and bring him in and just welcome the legend himself, sir. How are you doing? I guess it is, if I'm not mistaken, the weekend for you, early morning.
It is indeed. It's Saturday morning. Excited to be here. I think this is my first time on an FBI podcast. So excited to be making my debut.
Yeah, and this is your, if I'm not mistaken, second podcast, fantasy basketball podcast, because you did the mock draft with the guys from Insight Sports. But yeah, I guess this is the first non-mock draft. We'll just call it that. The first one, it's not a mock draft where we're just going through and just kind of talking hoops, talking about the Central Division, which we'll just go ahead and dive right in to that because of the big news that happened earlier this week. Damian Lillard got traded to the Bucks. In case you haven't heard, I'm sure if you're listening to a fantasy basketball podcast, specifically this one, then you probably are at least able to keep up to date on news enough to know that Dame is now a Buck. And really, I mean, it was a massive trade. I guess I should have pulled up the trade details in front of me, but Drew Holiday is a Portland Trailblazer for the time being. DeAndre Ayton's a Blazer. The Suns got Yusuf Nurkic, but really Dame is in Milwaukee, and that's the only Central Division team in that trade. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about. Maybe a little bit about what they lost by giving up Drew Holiday, Grayson Allen. Maybe there was somebody else in there that they had to give up that I just don't remember off the top of my head. But we'll start with the Bucks because, I mean, everybody else in the Central Division is kind of fun to talk about, but this is the big news. This is where everybody's kind of talking about fantasy basketball right now because of how big of an impact that this is probably going to have when you have two guys that were being drafted later in the first round. I actually have somewhere, there it is, the FBI ADP data. I can finally use that instead of referencing Yahoo ones. So yeah, before the trade, Giannis's ADP was 9.09, which actually had him being drafted 8th just because of how those numbers work. And then Dame was 11.33, which actually had him technically 12th by the way the numbers work through, I believe that's a 75 draft-only leagues. Current, when we look at that and you have two guys that were being drafted in the first round that are now on the same team, do you still consider both of them to be first-round guys, like guys you'd still – like how much – does that affect where you're drafting them, the fact they're playing on the same team and sharing the ball?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, right? I think, first of all, from a purely basketball standpoint, I don't think there is a better fit player for Giannis than Dame. I'm a big Drew Holiday fan, as many of us are, right? I think he contributes to winning basketball, but when you can replace him with Dame's gravity, Dame's shot making, especially in the playoffs, where we know that Drew, while his defense has been stellar, like he's had some challenges sometimes offensively in the playoffs. So I feel like from a fit standpoint, it fits like a glove, right? And they do, in my mind, it's a little early. We need to see the preseason, but they do become the championship favorites. I think Vegas has them as favorites as well. So no surprise there. In terms of fantasy, I know we're not talking about the Pacific Division because I think you did that with B-Dub as well, but I think the biggest winner has to be DeAndre Ayton in this entire thing. I'm not going to spend so much time on it, but in terms of just a person who's going to rise up draft boards as a result of this trade, it's him. I think for Giannis and Dame, they probably stay where they are, in my opinion. Between that, if you're really looking at from an 8 to 12 standpoint, 8 to 13 standpoint, maybe if you're not that bullish on one of them. I think obviously Giannis and Dame both will take hits in scoring. You would anticipate that it gets split up there. What I'm most interested to see or hopeful to find out is if Giannis's defensive stats come back. Just given that now we have Dame in that team to carry some of that offensive load, does he focus a little bit more on defense? Does he go for those steals? Does that weak side, the blocks that he does, and the free safety role that he played in the championship year? That is what I'm most excited to see, because if his defensive stats come back, then we're talking, that Giannis would potentially beat that number. That's where I'm at with it. I don't know if it puts them down in my draft board, but depending on how preseason goes, I'm pretty high on LaMelo. Like there is a chance I may take LaMelo before these two. Steph for sure, but LaMelo as well, maybe potentially over these two, and they're right in that range. I think 7 to 12 is a very tight range of players you can make an argument for any of them going at 7 or 8. So that's
Yeah.
where I stand on it. What do you think about the impact on Giannis's this year with D stats in particular?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, now that I'm looking at the screen, I realize I have slides for this and I forgot to pull them up. So if anybody's watching, they can follow along on the screen. So I have that up. But as far as Giannis's defensive stats, that's a really good point to bring that up because he averaged 0.8 blocks per game last year after averaging 1.1 steals, 1.4 blocks the year before, and averaging at least one of each of them as Basketball Monster's kind of loading for me. Basically every season since the second year of his career. So, I guess a lot of people blame the free throw percentage for his drop in rank, I guess like Z score, 9-cat scoring. If you follow that very, very closely, which I feel like it's a good thing to reference, but the free throw percentage was obviously a big reason for that drop, but also it was a drop in the defensive stats, because I think before he was, a good source of defensive stats, then averaging less than one of each. It's not as ideal for a guy like him, especially with the free throw percentage of the turnovers. But I'm still taking him in the first round. I think I was going to take him in the first round, probably potentially as high as 7 before the trade. And right now, I don't think that changes too much for me because yes, Dame is going to get his shots. Maybe Giannis loses out on a shot or two per game. But I think you bring up the defensive stats. I think that's going to be something that he's able to kind of bring back because last year, Drew Holiday was there, but Chris Middleton was hardly there. Like when he was there, he was also dealing with his knee issues and wasn't able to play, I don't know, as many minutes or just wasn't the same player. So Giannis was having to do more offensively, I feel like. But now that Dame is there, I think it's going to be more balanced. I mean, you have 2 all-NBA guys there. I'm still taking Giannis probably about the same spot. And I think that the free throw percentage should be better enough. But I'm not too concerned about that or the turnovers. But I think, like you said, the defensive set's going to come up. And then Dame, for me, I was probably going to take Dame as a first-round guy, but I didn't feel good about it until I actually that's why I'm glad I actually have been doing podcasts with different analysts to kind of get their perspective on things, because I feel like everybody has different opinions or things that they look at that matter to them. And when I was doing them with the Pacific Division with B-Dub, we talked about Dame a good bit because of a potential trade, because we were talking about the Suns and DeAndre Ayton. And in my mind, because Dame has missed a lot of games the last 2 years, he's not as durable as he probably actually is. Because even the report came out, I think it was earlier today or maybe yesterday, saying that Portland kind of made him sit out the last 10 games when he wanted to play, just to help their lottery pick so that they could trade that lottery pick and bring him help. But then obviously things didn't turn out that way. But I think Dame's games played won't be as much of an issue now that he's on a real contender. So they're both very solid first round guys for me. Honestly, I think, and this may be me looking into games played too much, but I think I might even take them as high as like both of them, like 7 or 8. I think I really like LaMelo this year, but guys like Steph, KD, and AD that are also going in the first round, they miss a lot of games, and I'm trying to be, I don't know, not playing into that way, way too much, but also just like being mindful of it. And maybe that's a good idea. Maybe it's not. I guess we'll kind of see. But I feel good about taking both of them as first round guys.
For sure, right. And in a points league, Giannis still has to go. I mean, for our points league listeners as well, right? Points league, he has to still go in the, I would say, in the top 3 or 4. You can't go later than that for him. And in terms of that's for me as well. Both of them are going to be in the first round. And if you do take them, like one of them in the first round, and the games played is a consideration in your mind, that's how then you can balance that up in your second and third rounds by taking quote unquote safer players who don't have that kind of history, maybe younger players who are looking to play more or whatever the case may be. So that's how our draft goes, right? For example, if you take a LaMelo in round 1, then you potentially have a chance of taking someone else like a Kawhi in round 2 because you're like, okay, I have that safety of a LaMelo, like even though he's coming off injury as well, but
yeah,
not much of. I think not much of long-term concern with him as it is with Giannis's knees and Dame's potential advanced age as well coming up now. So I'm with you. Both of these guys, like if someone's drafting them, and I think their schedule is really good as well. If anyone cares about that in terms of playing on low volume days, etc., because it's Milwaukee. So that is a consideration as well if you're sort of having a tiebreaker in terms of who you want to pick between LaMelo and a potential Dame or Giannis.
Yeah, and the two other guaranteed starters, in my opinion, are Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez. I mentioned Middleton earlier because he just had knee issues last year, wasn't able to play probably as much as we would have liked to see out of him. Played in 33 games, only 24.3 minutes per game. Just wasn't nearly as good as he has been the past few years, which is, when you're dealing with knee issues, like that's not necessarily unexpected or really surprising, but it did kind of result in maybe a bit of a wasted season for him. But he should be back fully healthy this year. I haven't read any reports saying otherwise, so that's kind of be just assuming, considering he was able to play in the playoffs. And then Brook Lopez, who had a fantastic year as one of the best shot blockers in the league, hitting threes as well, had a ridiculously high finish. He finished 22nd in 9 cat leagues. Now, this isn't a guy you're taking in the second round, but he's a guy that was really, really good last year, despite being kind of an aging center. How does, kind of the way that this roster is, shifted? I mean, now it's Drew Holiday's gone, adding in Damian Lillard, and I mean, it's not too many other major. You're losing Grayson Allen, okay? Like not too many other major changes there. But how are those two guys kind of impacted by this deal?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think like if you look at Middleton, right, his ADP on Fantrax at the moment is 70, and on Yahoo it's 84. So at those spots, I would still be okay with it because you're baking in at that price, the risk you're baking that in, right? You're taking him at a later round. I think in terms of potentially impact on fantasy, his scoring potentially has to come down a little bit because obviously Dame's going to take a lot more of that usage than Drew did. What would be interesting to me, especially for Middleton, is his playmaking, right? Like on the surface, you can make an argument that Dame's there and Dame's a higher assist player or a higher primary ball handler player than Drew Holiday. So therefore, Middleton's assists can go down. But inversely, you could also think that they don't have many guards coming off the bench, right? If you look at it, they've lost Javon. who is the backup point guard on that team, right? I mean, if you look at the depth chart on Basketball Reference, like is it the rookie Andre Jackson? Is it Pat Connaughton? Is it Marjon Beauchamp? So I feel like that's a question. Like, what do you think? Like, do you think as a result of Dame coming, Middleton's assists go up or go down?
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I was ESPN's, because that's just what I've always used, just for a lot of like box scores, things like that. I was pulling up their depth chart really quickly, and they still haven't updated for the Dame trade, which is lovely. But I think it's interesting. I imagine looking at their roster that they would add somebody. Like they have to add another point guard because right now it's not anybody like really. But like there is guys available. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think Campaign is signed anywhere, so maybe that's an option.
Great fit.
But I think that would be just a solid backup for Dame. But I think Dame is also a guy that he's incredible with the ball in his hands, but you can also work him off ball a good bit. I think that he's not a Steph or Klay Thompson, but nobody is. But you can have him come off some screens, allow Middleton to operate with the ball in his hands, allow Giannis to operate with the ball in his hands, and have Dame be a gravitational shooter. I think that's, some that'll work out. I'm not sure if Middleton's assists are impacted. I don't think that they're going to like take a dramatic step up, but I don't think it's maybe either half assist more or half assist less because he's averaged last year, like I said, 4.9, kind of that wasn't that far off from the past few seasons, whereas 5.4 the 2 years before. Everything else kind of took a hit except for the assists. But I imagine 5.4 is because Dame isn't like he's a good playmaker, he's a good passer, but I'm not saying he's not going to come in and all of a sudden average 8 or 9 assists. Like it's just not his game. So I think that Middleton is going to be fine, averaging 5-ish assists per game. I could definitely see that happening again.
Yeah, and that's what I'm sort of leaning towards at the moment as well, unless they sign someone like, as you said, like Campaign. For Brook Lopez, I think it's we can talk about overall macro Brook Lopez's blocks. Are they going to come back or not? But that's got nothing to do with Dame. I think in terms of from a fantasy perspective, maybe like you said, like maybe he reduces a field goal attempt or something. But I wouldn't look at Brook being so directly impacted by Dame coming in. Yeah. That's I would still pick him like not as early as the top 20 or 30 for sure, but where is he going at the moment? He is going on Fantrax. He is, let's have a look.
I have his FBI ADP right here where he's going 64th and Middleton is going 68th.
Yeah. I think Middleton, I'm all right with at that level. Brook, because there's so many guys who can average like 1.5 to 2 blocks this year. I don't know if I'm going to look at him in the 60s, but potentially in the 70s and 80s, I'd be happy to have a crack at it. But yeah, that's how I kind of look at it. I would prefer a Mark Williams at that rate or at that stage in the draft if I can get him.
Yeah, so I think this is going to change pretty quickly after that trade, but the data from, I guess this is from 2 days ago that B-Dub has it. So maybe I don't know if they've done more drafts to where this would be updated, but Brook Lopez was 64, DeAndre Ayton was 65. So I imagine Ayton's going to shoot up. Gobert was 66. Jakob Poeltl was 75. Mark Williams 78. So I guess those are kind of the centers going after. Jared Allen is 60, so he's before. So I think it's hard for me, and this is just my tendency to draft younger guys. I think I'm hesitant to draft older guys at times, especially with a guy like Brook Lopez, where he was awesome last year, but if the blocks are gone, like that obviously changes him a lot. But I don't think, like you kind of said, Lopez is going to be directly impacted by Dame's arrival too much. He may lose out on some attempts, but he's also probably going to get better looks, even having a scorer like Dame there. He might get a few more open shots. I think Middleton ends up being a little bit more impacted just because, I mean, you could argue he was the number one scoring option at times for Milwaukee, especially during their championship run, just because, as dominant as Giannis is, he tends to be limited by his poor shooting. But I think Middleton's really good with the ball in his hands. You'd say he has been their closer for the past few seasons, but obviously you bring in Damian Lillard, that kind of goes to him now. So I think Middleton will still be really good. I think 68 is probably high for me, especially with some of the guys going a bit after. But I think he's impacted more than Brook Lopez is. But if we want to move on to our last Bucks question, which is who will the fifth starter be? I think when I did my initial tweet, it was the guys that I looked at were Pat Connaughton or I believe Malik Beasley is there. And then I've seen Marjan Beauchamp thrown out there as well as a possibility. Who do you think ends up getting the starting nod? And whoever it ends up being, do you think that they're worth drafting in the last round?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely, you hit the money on the head with that, right? So I think like in terms of Beasley and Connaughton are the two candidates for it. If Beasley, obviously, we know that he likes to shoot threes, right? And he's pretty good at making them as well. I think in shot making talent, Basketball Index has him like top 6 or 7 in terms of per 75 possessions. He's top 10 in 3-point attempts and 3-point made. So he is going to bomb away threes if he's in that lineup, right? And in a draft in a standard league setting, if we all know threes are available on the wire, threes are available late. So in a last round, if you want like a guy who could potentially come in and give you like 3 threes, it won't surprise anyone. You can get him in the last round, right? Connaughton, obviously, he's more of that connector build, like, not like exactly like a Bruce Brown, but in that same mold of a player who cuts well, who's also decent at catch and shoot. They could. He's obviously been with Milwaukee much longer, so they could potentially give him that spot as well. I wouldn't want him in a last round just because I don't see that he's going to have that much of standard league value in that lineup as the fifth option. But Beasley just for threes. I think an outside shot, and this guy's not going to be relevant for fantasy, but just an outside shot. Jay Crowder is still on this roster, right?
Wow.
They did send like a truckload of second round picks if I remember it correctly for him. He's still here, and he makes a lot of sense in this lineup, right? You get a wing defender to come in between of Giannis and let him play that free safety role. You let like Crowder to come in and cover off for Dame's defensive struggles as well. Maybe it's him, and then it's like a 3-way mix between these 3 guys, and nobody's relevant for fantasy. That's a possibility. So I would be avoiding just looking at Beasley potentially if he wins the role in preseason for the last round pick.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't even consider Jay Crowder because honestly, I forgot he was on the roster. So I'm glad you said that. But yeah, I think Beasley's a late round guy just because of how many threes he can hit. Connaughton, like you said, not quite as appealing, though. If I'm not mistaken, he was. Maybe I'm making this up. Maybe this is all in my head. Was he decent like 2 years ago? So yeah, so 2021-22 season, he finished 130 in 9 cap, mostly because he was pretty efficient, didn't really turn the ball over, and hit 2.23. So not great. That was in 26 minutes per game. So not a ton of fantasy upside unless you're looking for threes. But I think in standard leagues, Malik Beasley, like you said, is a target. Hopefully he gets the starting nod, though it wouldn't be shocking for Pat Connaughton too, considering he used to be a starter for them. Jay Crowder, that's an outside one. I like that. I didn't even consider that. But we'll move on to Detroit, who is coming off I had it pulled up, 17-65 season, which was the worst record in the NBA. Mostly, I mean, they were tanking by the end of the season, probably a lot earlier than some other teams, just by pulling the plug on Bojan Bogdanovic. Oh gosh, when did they even pull the plug on him? Like February or something like that? Maybe it was March. But obviously, Cade Cunningham going down really early kind of made them realize pretty quickly, like, hey, yeah, any sort of progression we were going to see, we're probably just going to have to wait till next year, which is fine. That allowed them to add Asar Thompson in the draft, who we'll get to. But team built around Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, I think are the 2 guys in my mind that are guaranteed starters. No doubt about it. Those guys are starting at the 1 and the 2. Then you have 3 other spots where you need to kind of fill out starters. And I haven't, maybe there's already been something said, but I don't think I've seen anything. And Media Day next week will probably give us a better idea of who's going to start. So you have Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, Marvin Bagley, James Wiseman, Bojan Bogdanovic, and I think Asar Thompson are 6 guys that could start. Now, we'll go ahead and start with you. Who do you think is starting in this front court for Detroit?
I think their entire, you're right with Ivy and Cunningham. Obviously, I think they're going to start Stewart I just the way I've read from the beat reporters and people close to Detroit on Twitter, I think they view him as a stretch four. Whether it's true or whether I mean, it's something that's feasible or not, we'll find out. But I think he gets the first crack at the four, and then therefore it leaves Boyan at the three, right? Now, do I think there's a large possibility of Asar starting? I think there was an article by James L. Edwards who's the person who covers Detroit if I'm not mistaken, in The Athletic,
Yeah.
and he said he wouldn't be surprised if Asar Thompson starts. And then that would mean that Stewart comes to the bench then, because I don't think they're benching Boyan. So then that would mean Boyan moves to the four and Osar starts at the three. Either way, in terms of from a fantasy perspective, even if he doesn't start, I think Osar gets 27 minutes, 26 minutes minimum, and maybe with upside for more as the season goes on, obviously. And obviously, the preseason starting in a few days, we'll find out next week. I think we'll find out how they're viewing it as well, and that'll impact how we view him in drafts. But I would look at Osar definitely in late rounds, like regardless of whether he's starting or not. I did a piece on him on my website and for FBI as well, covering him during the draft, and I had him really high. I think he's just a really intelligent player. I think he's going to make winning decisions. He contributes to winning, and he's got a multi-cat skill set. Like obviously percentages is something to keep in mind, but he's got a multi-cat skill set. I would definitely look at him in the later rounds, regardless of if he starts or not.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. They're probably going to start Isaiah Stewart. That's going to make me mad because in my mind, it's like you should start Asar Thompson. He's going to be, whether he comes off the bench or starts, going to be really good. But in my mind, you just spent the 5th pick on him. And it also just fits more of modern basketball to start him at the 3, Bojan Bogdanovic at the 4, and Jalen Duren at the 5. They keep trying to force this too big lineup. I mean, there was times towards the end of last season, I think they were just trying to figure things out, see what works, see what didn't. But it was like a Marvin Bagley, James Wiseman starting lineup. Like, oh, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking that they did that because it was kind of a nightmare. But maybe they didn't actually do that. I don't have that pulled up to see if that actually happened. But I don't think either of those guys have a chance of starting or should have a chance of starting. I think that fine, take them off the bench, whatever. Jalen Duren, to me, should be locked in as a starting center. I view Bojan Bogdanovic more as a 4. That's just the way I view him. I think defensively it makes more sense because I don't think that there's many guys that are playing the 3 that he's able to keep up with, but I think the 4 makes a little bit more sense for him defensively. And then just also having Asar Thompson out there because of how bad Detroit's been defensively. I think having him there it's going to allow him to do a lot as a rookie. I think there's a chance that he ends up as one of the best rookies in fantasy, simply because if we're looking at 9 cap value, I guess, because I think he's going to end up being more efficient than guys like Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson that are playing massive roles. But he's also going to be able to get a lot of defensive stats. And I guess that kind of also ties in for your where should you draft Asar Thompson now that we've just been kind of talking about him. But there, just to wrap that up, Jalen Duren is going to start at center, in my opinion, unless something just drastic happens. Hopefully they're
that'd be
smart
shocking
enough.
if they don't.
Yes.
That would be
Agreed. Hopefully they're smart enough to start Bogdanovic and Asar Thompson. If they do start Isaiah Stewart, I would be shocked. I'm just hopeful if they don't. But whether he starts or not, where do you think you're going to kind of look at drafting Asar Thompson? Because you could talk about him being as like a late round flyer, but like he's going to go before the final round. His FBI ADP is 134, which puts him early 12th round of drafts. Do you think that's fine for him, or would you take him earlier or later?
I'd even go earlier, man. I'm happy going 1 round earlier, depending on what I've done in the rest of the draft, as I was mentioning earlier in the on this, right? That if you've had safety guys that you've taken in your first 6, 7 picks, and you have the ability to make these picks, so easily I would go maybe 110 onwards. I would start considering him because, and especially if you know your league, right? That's another thing to keep in mind. If you know the people you're playing with and their styles, it could dictate a lot, right? Do you have people in your league who are more towards the let's take safety, let's take the Mike Conleys and the Harrison Barnes of the world in the last rounds, then you can potentially wait. But if you have guys who are going to be chasing upside, then you got to get your guys. Otherwise, they're going to be gone by the time you want them.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely take him earlier, especially looking at some of the guys that are kind of going even just around earlier. You look at Russell Westbrook's going 125, Mike Conley's going 126. Like I would probably take a shot, depending on what kind of team I've built. I'd probably take a shot on Asar before those guys. I mean, let's see. Yeah, Kevin Porter Jr. is at 129, so I'm sure that'll change. It already has been changing. All right. I think 110 is a good number. I think, and maybe a little later than that. Zach Collins is 113 on this ADP chart for FBI leagues. Definitely earlier than 134. I'd say around earlier. 120-ish is probably where I'm going to kind of lock in and say, because obviously this is going to change a little bit, I think, but Shaden Sharp at 118, Jaden Ivey 119. I don't think I'd take Asar over either of them, but I think 120 is very fair. But that leads into our next one, which is how good will Jaden Ivey be in year 2? And I just said his ADP is 119. How do you feel about that? Like, do you think that's going to end up being just a massive bargain for a guy taking a second-year leap?
Yeah, I would be happy to take him at that stage, right? At that stage in the draft, right? I think he obviously a lot of his success came without Cade. Actually, most of his success last year came without Cade because Cade just played like a handful of 12 games, I reckon. So what would be interesting to see for Jaden Ivey would be, I think last year his finishing was really improved as the year went on. His 3-point shot making as well as his passing chops really came up a lot in the second half of the season after the All-Star break. And the key 2 points to look at for him would be percentages, right? And that's any rookie guard who's coming into year 2, year 3. How much can they improve their percentages? Can they go to from I think he was a 41 last year? Can he go from a 41 to a 43? And is that something that bumps him up? Second thing to point for him would be his playmaking. Now Cade's back. Cade's going to be the primary ball handler. We all know that. Osar can handle the ball a bit, but I feel like Jaden's going to be the secondary playmaker in this team. Can he keep up those, can he give you those 5 assists? Like when we talked about Middleton earlier, no means comparing them as similar players, but can he give you 5 assists like that as a secondary playmaker as well? That would give me that would give him the value. And at 120, there's no risk. I'd be happy to take a crack at him there.
Yeah, I agree. I think 120 is going to end up feeling like a bargain. I think it's hard for me to get behind Jaden Ivey this year because I'm just very curious how this team is going to look. Because I think there's a lot of hype about Cade Cunningham coming into the season, mostly because nobody's really seen him play in a while, and he apparently did really well at these USA scrimmages. And that's not enough for me to buy in. I know a lot of people have him ranked high, and I love Cade Cunningham. I have him, I believe, 9th in my dynasty rankings. Like, it's going to come where he's one of the best players in the NBA, in my opinion. I just don't know if that happens immediately. So I just don't know how this Detroit team's going to look this year. Is Cade Cunningham going to come in, have the ball in his hands immediately, and just everybody that saw this Team USA practice is going to be right? And it's like, yeah, no, this guy's actually better than everybody else. Or is it, is he going to have some issues to kind of work through where his field goal percentage is kind of low? He's turning the ball over kind of like last year. And how does that impact Jaden Ivey? If Cade Cunningham has the ball in his hands the entire time, is Jaden Ivey just able to be more efficient? I mean, he averaged 3.2 turnovers last year. Like you said, shot 41.6%. If Cade Cunningham is controlling the offense, I have no doubts that Jaden Ivey's turnovers will go down, his field goal percentage will go up, his scoring will probably go up from 16.3 per game. The assists were 5.2. Maybe it takes a slight hit, but I don't think it drops dramatically even with Cade Cunningham there, because I'd pretty much have Jaden Ivey as the backup point guard. And that case, whenever Cade's off the floor, I'm sure they're going to try and have Jaden Ivey playing point guard minutes. So I think 120 is, going to end up feeling like a bargain, but I'm also a bit hesitant to take him significantly earlier than that, just because I'm very curious how Detroit's going to look this year, because they have all of these pieces that they're trying to make work. And it just, it's not clear cut to me that all this is going to fit in well, and a lot of these guys are going to be really good. Like Cade Cunningham is going to just automatically be a third round guy or whatever his ADP is, actually, because we haven't really talked about Cade while we're talking about Detroit. His ADP in these FBI leagues is 24. So like a second round pick on Cade Cunningham, who barely played last year, to me, that's a big investment on a guy that, was good as a rookie, wasn't very good at the beginning of last year, and then missed most of the season. So hopefully I'm wrong on that. But I think how Cade Cunningham is going to end up dictating how good Jaden Ivey can be. To take all that and wrap it into one small point, which makes me kind of not even really directly answer this question of how good Jaden Ivey will be, just because I think that there's multiple factors that kind of impact it.
Correct. And Cade's going to be a polarizing player to draft this year. We're going to have some people who are going to be really high on him, some people who are not. So it'll be really interesting to see how the ADP comes in after the preseason for him.
Yeah. All right, and we will move on from this point to the Indiana Pacers, who finished, as I'm pulling this up because I went away from the standings, they finished 11th in the East, 6 games out of making the play-in, 35-47. But in my opinion, it was a very good year for them because they have a star, they have a franchise player, and they probably would have made the play-in tournament had he been able to play more, but he missed some games. And that's Tyrese Haliburton, just in case that wasn't clear on who their face of the franchise was. And they have what I think is going to end up being a very good roster within the next few seasons. Definitely going to return to I'd imagine returning to playing postseason basketball this year. Whether that's ends up making out of the play-in tournament or not, I don't know. But within the next few years, I think they're going to be very, very good if they keep up with what they have. But we're still trying to figure out the starting unit because I imagine Tyrese Haliburton and Miles Turner are the 2 locks. But the big question is, after last year, trying to make do with Aaron Nesmith and whoever else they could randomly throw in, trying to make either a small forward into a power forward or a center into power forward. Jalen Smith, they tried that experiment as well. Somebody's going to have to start at power forward. And they actually have 2 power forward options because they traded, I think, 2 seconds for Obi Toppin, and they drafted Jarris Walker with the number 8 pick after trading with Washington. Who do you think is going to start? Is it Jarris Walker or is it Obi Toppin?
I think obviously Haliburton, Turner going to start. I think $45 million man, Bruce Brown, I think he's potentially going to start or lock to start as well. We'll talk about him a little later. And I think like Mathurin, there's been a lot of chatter in the offseason that he's going to start. So let's assume that he's starting as well, obviously with Buddy Hield and the situation that he has. So yeah, I like Jarris Walker coming into the draft. I think obviously the lazy comparison, not the lazy, like the general, a lot of the comparison is, can he be like a Draymond type player? No, nobody can easily be a Draymond type player. But what I do like about him is he can defend really well. He can pass. He has some passing chops out of that position, right? I think this is a dynasty thing, but maybe like in his prime, if he's playing center, after Miles Turner's gone or whatever the case may be, he could average 5 or 6 assists out of the center PF spot. I could easily see that happening right down the line. But I think in terms of when you look at Obi Toppin, right? Obi Toppin's profile in New York, he didn't play many minutes. He was behind Julius Randle and Tibbs plays guys like 44 minutes, so he barely played. So I think but he is a good 3-point shooter. For whatever his faults are for Obi Toppin in terms of defense and that, he is a good 3-point shooter. Another thing I noticed about him last year was his cutting improved as well to the basket with Jalen Brunson there. And Jalen Brunson is not the passer that Tyrese Haliburton is. So therefore, I think he's going to have more opportunities and he fits better with Miles Turner at the back, as a defensive anchor than Jarris does. So if I have to pick right now, I think Obi Toppin would start. But it would not surprise me if it's a 25, 23-minute split. And then we see what happens in January onwards, after the All-Star break, and Feb onwards, then maybe Jarris overtakes Obi. That's how I would look at it from a fantasy standpoint. I would not be looking at Jarris in standard leagues just yet. just because I don't think in 22 minutes, if we assume that's what he's playing, he can make an impact. But I'd be keen to see what happens in the preseason. But Obi, for sure, I would be looking at as a later round, maybe last round pick. Definitely have a flyer at him because he could give you like 5 or 6 rebounds, 14 points, two threes. You know, that's sort of valuable at that stage.
Yeah, and his Obi Toppin's FBI ADP is 157, and Jarris Walker's is 184. So, and actually, out of 75 drafts, Obi Toppin was drafted in 68 of them, and Jarris Walker was drafted in 33 of them. So it sounds like, based off that, Jarris Walker is going undrafted in over half of leagues. So, like you said, probably not worth in standard leagues, just because we don't know yet. I'd imagine Obi Toppin gets the first crack at the starting unit because this isn't a rebuilding team anymore. It's a team that's going to look to make the playoffs this year. And even though they only invested 2 second-round picks in Obi Toppin and they invested a top 10 pick in Jarris Walker, I think right now their focus is going to be on trying to win basketball games. I think Obi Toppin gives them the best chance to do that to start the season. Now, that could change really quickly, but I think they like the idea, or maybe just Tyrese Halliburton likes the idea, but I like the idea too of having Halliburton throwing lobs to Obi Toppin. Like that sounds like a lot of fun, but it's also not really taking away from what Miles Turner does, because not saying he's not going to run pick and rolls, but Miles Turner is a really good stretch 5 as well. So
solid player, solid winning player.
Yeah,
He is.
Yeah, they have a really good line. I'd imagine Bruce Brown starts. That's definitely there. Potentially Benedict Mathurin, potentially injured Nemhard. I need to figure out how to pronounce that last name. I keep using names and just never looking up how to pronounce them and just saying I'm going to. Anyways, chance he starts over Mathurin, but I think Obi Toppin is probably going to start and has more fantasy upside just because, like you said, good 3-point shooter, good pick and roll threat, athletic guy. I don't think he really did much, like provide him any defensive stats in New York.
He's not known for that. That's not his calling card.
Even though he may be athletic enough to block some shots, it's just not happening. So I think that there's fantasy upside there, more so with Obi Toppin as the starter, and I imagine that he gets the starting unit. I know I've just said the same thing like 3 times. So we'll move to the next point. How much better will Benedict Mathurin be in year 2? In year 1, he averaged 16.7 points, 4.1 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 1.3 steals, 1.3 threes. And I know Rhett Bauer has looked at Sports Ethos. Rhett Bauer has looked at the advanced stats. I don't remember if it was his college advanced stats or his rookie year advanced stats. I think it may have been his rookie year advanced stats versus Jaylen Brown's, and they're eerily similar. Like a lot of like the assist percentage, steal percentage, block percentage, like a lot of things like that. So, and if you look at and like watch him play, I don't think it's super different from Jaylen Brown. I think they share a lot of the same qualities, including just shooting the ball a lot. So I think that that's, not necessarily a bad thing. I think it kind of fits with what Indiana likes to do, but year 2 leaps are a real thing. How much better do you think Benedict Mathurin will be in year 2?
Yeah, that's quite interesting, right? I think 2 things that stand out for me for Mathurin, right? I think one of them is his self shot creation. He has that ability as a rookie. He showed that, right? He can find his own shot. And then the other one that I looked at for him, which I wrote in my piece as well, is his rim shot creation is really high for a rookie. Well, was really high for a rookie. Like he is going to the rim a lot. Therefore, he's getting a lot of foul calls as well, right? And that's obviously a good sign there. I think a couple of areas where we can potentially see improvement, as you said, with second-year guards in terms of FG, right? That's can he get his percentage up a little bit, right? I think he was at 43 last year. Does he get it to a 45? Does he get it to a 45 and a half, right? Does he take better quality shots now? Does he, like, moving into the starting lineup, a little bit more controlled role with Halliburton there as well? Does he take better shots? And the other thing I think is his 3-point shooting. I'm not saying he's going to become like some kind of like sharpshooter, but he was better in college than he was last year. I think he shot, like, if I'm not mistaken, 31. In college, he shot, I think, 30. Yeah, pardon me. He shot 37% in year one and 42% in year two in college, right? So does he get back to that kind of like 36, 37 range? And that would make an impact as well. I know he doesn't attempt a lot of threes, but that could make an impact there. And the other two elements, other more elements in terms of stat set is, can he up his rebound rate a little bit, right? That would give him some value. Um, I think I, I would look at him in the last rounds, because you don't get that kind of scoring late in rounds. Like, that's he could easily average like 18 points, 19 points, something like that. And I would look at him just like I would look at an Ivy, pass 120, 115, easy. I would look at him.
Yeah, and his ADP is 138 in FBI leagues. So I think, like you said, late round flyer, I'd probably take him. Maybe second to last round, I would take him, but I'm not super confident in him taking a big step this year. I think it may end up being a couple of years. Like, when I say a couple of years, like year 3, year 4, where he kind of takes his leap forward. I'm not set on it happening this year, because I think Indiana, like I said, is going to try and make the playoffs. They're not focused on developing now. They're focused on winning. I'm not saying that wasn't the case last year, but I think more so it's kind of going into the season with, we have the guys, we have the team, we can do this, we can make the playoffs. So is Mathurin going to be a guaranteed starter? In my opinion, no. We'll probably know more after media day, seeing more reports, seeing how training camp goes. And I think, probably by the end of the season, I'd imagine he's the starter, but I'm not sure if that's like a smooth transition from year 1. Okay, year 2, he's taking a leap. He's going to be better. I just don't know. I don't know if I don't have a ton of numbers to back that up. I'm not confident that he's going to take a leap, really, other than I'm just not confident he's going to take a leap. I think they might just end up being a great scoring option this year, like a guy that can score, gets to the free throw line. But I don't know how much he's improving his field goal percentage. He might be a better shot maker, but he also might be taking tougher shots now, so his field goal percentage may not go up. Maybe he hits more threes. I think that's very reasonable. I don't know how many more rebounds he's getting. Is he getting more assists, more defense? I don't see these things happening with where Indiana's at. I mean, Bruce Brown's going to end up probably guarding the better perimeter defenders, so that would give him more of an opportunity to get some of the defensive stats that maybe Benedict Mathurin won't be able to get. Tyrese Halliburton's going to get steals. It'd be pretty shocking to see all of these guys getting a ton of steals. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe it'll end up being really good for Indiana. I'm not quite as confident that Benedict Mathurin is going to be significantly better in year 2, statistically from a fantasy standpoint, than he was in year 1.
Yep. I think the defensive stats is, zero hope for that. And I would just like, on a side note, I would take Ivy over him. Like, if you're comparing second year players in a draft, like, Ivy's playmaking upside is more than enough for me to take him easily over him. Mathurin, it's just if you need that boost in points in the end with a little bit of potential, second year upside, if you will. I think that's the only time you look at him past 120, because you're not going to find that scoring otherwise really easy. Like Jordan Clarkson, for example, last year was a guy you could find late who gave that kind of scoring boost. And that's how I view kind of Mathurin as well. Scoring boost, free throw boost.
Yeah. And how much is Bruce Brown going to contribute? He was massive for Denver last year, especially in the playoffs, helping them. Like, he was a key part in helping them win a championship. And now he signed, I think it was the 2-year, $45 million deal to join the Pacers. I don't think he's expecting to repeat as a champion, but you never know. But he was incredibly effective and is going to be, I think he's going to help them kind of take that next step in getting into the playoffs. I think he's just a winning basketball player. He averaged 11.5 points, 4.1 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 1.1 steals, 0.6 blocks, and 1.1 threes. Shot 48.3% from the field. I think a really good rebounder for a 6'4" guy. I mean, there's a reason that he's able to play the 3 at 6'4", is that he's able to do a lot of the little things. His ADP is 110 on FBI. How do you kind of see him fitting in for this Pacers team?
I think absolutely what you said. I couldn't agree more, right? He is a connector. He is a winning player, as you said, right? I think he contributes across the board. He is a really solid wing defender. And I think last year he even played up at the 4. He played the 1, 2, 3, 4 for them, right? So for the Nuggets, and I'm happy with him pick after where he's going in terms of Fantrax ADP past 110. I think there's value there because his percentages are his FG is strong. He doesn't hurt you anywhere. He's solid across the board. I wouldn't expect like much upside for him, like in terms of like a top, I don't know, like a top 60 or 50 season. I would not expect that at all. But I would be happy with him in the hundreds because I can see like he could return top 80, top 90 value in 8 cat. And 9 cat definitely, but an 8 cat as well. And he's solid, man. He's gonna get minutes, and as you said, they're looking to win games. They're probably looking to make the play in, or if not outright the playoffs, and he would contribute to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said, like we've said, he's going to start. He's going to be able to provide defensive stats, contribute to winning. I think 110 is fair. I think that I don't know how much earlier than that I'd even take him. I know you said hundreds. I'd probably be a little bit more hesitant on it, but I think he's a guy that also is going to help them be good at basketball more so than he's going to contribute in 9-cat leagues or just contribute in fantasy, but not because he's going to be bad in fantasy. I just think that he's going to make so much more of an impact for them than he will for fantasy managers. But we'll wrap up the Pacers and move on to Chicago. And I think we'll just go ahead and try and crank out this whole division. B-Dub is going to be jealous because we did 2.5 hours across 2 episodes for the Pacific, but we're going to actually do this whole thing in probably a little bit over an hour, hopefully not too much more than an hour. But the Bulls made the play-in, beat the Raptors in the first one, lost to the Heat in the second one. Who knows if DeMar DeRozan's daughter was able to go to the second play-in game, maybe they would have been the ones making the NBA Finals. But they pretty much have the same team again. They decided, like they did the trade deadline, that we're just going to try and run this thing back, which nobody understands why. So I think that right now they probably have 4 starting spots guaranteed. DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, and Patrick Williams at the 4, in my mind. Maybe this ends up being wrong, but Patrick Williams' ADP in FBI leagues has been 141. Would you take Patrick Williams earlier than the 12th round?
So, firstly, on the macro of Chicago, right? You're absolutely right. Like it's just such a boring team I mean, no offense to any Chicago Bulls fans listening, but it's just such a boring team to talk about from a fantasy standpoint. Like, I think in our notes before this, before we did the pod as well, we were talking about it. Like, where is the upside in Vooch, and where is the upside in Levine, and where is the upside in DeRozan? Like, where is it? Like, where can they take the next step, right? I'd be keen to find out from someone who can tell me that, right? But yeah, in terms of from a Patrick Williams standpoint, yeah, I think he profiles really well as a 3-and-D wing guy who has a little bit of upside there, and he is a good defender. Don't get that sort of twisted. And in terms of his defensive stats as well, like I think he gave like 1 block and 1 steal, which is solid, right? Coming in in his 3rd year, I think, or last year. So I wouldn't be against the idea of taking him past pick 120 just to see if he has that upside in his 3-point shooting. Can he ramp it up a little bit? Can he take a few more attempts, right, from 3? Can he keep his defensive stats as like that 1.1 maybe and 1.2? Can he get that up to that level from 1.0 and 1.0? That's a jump in rankings. We know how little these things can move rankings. And I would be happy with him in that late round because there is a little bit of upside, but I would not be super excited about him having a top 60 or 70 finish. If you're getting him at 120 or 130, you anticipate, okay, he'll potentially finish top 100, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I've never been a big Patrick Williams fan, but I have to be a little bit more on board with drafting him because he was much better last year. Played in 82 games after playing in 17 the year before. I think that probably goes under the radar a little bit. 0.9 steals, 0.9 blocks per game, like you said. It's just funny that to me because he was drafted number 4 overall in 2020. DeAndre Hunter was drafted number 4 overall in 2019. Kawhi Leonard's run just had teams in a chokehold where they were just trying to figure out how do we get Kawhi Leonard on our team without actually having to have Kawhi Leonard, because DeAndre Hunter, people were saying was going to be the next Kawhi Leonard. Then Patrick Williams was going to be the next Kawhi Leonard. He's not the next Kawhi Leonard. Like nobody, like we got to stop trying to find these player comps for generational team. Like you mentioned, Jarris Walker. People talking about him being Draymond. And we're like, no, he's not gonna. Like you said, he's not gonna be Draymond Green. He's not gonna be the greatest role player of all time. Kawhi Leonard is one of the greatest two-way players of all time. Yeah, like you're not just gonna find this every day. Like you might, but it's probably not gonna be the same. All that to be said, I think Patrick Williams is a guy that I would maybe take in the last round or two, which is, I know that's exactly where he's going. But I think in my mind, I'm just lower on Patrick Williams because I don't know how much more of an offensive opportunity he's going to get unless Chicago makes roster changes. And they don't seem interested in that, despite Lonzo Ball's career literally being in question. I think if Lonzo's there, this team is much better. They were much better when Lonzo was able to play than this play-in team that they've been the past 2 years. When Lonzo's been able to play, like they were a top, I don't remember exactly what the record was because it was so long ago, but like top 5 team in the East. And I think that's kind of maybe seems silly to say when you think about Chicago adding Lonzo Ball being a top 5 team in the East based on what we know, but that's what they were producing at the time. All that to be said, I don't know how much more of an offensive opportunity Patrick Williams is going to get with DeMar DeRozan still shooting a ton, Zach LaVine still shooting a ton, and Nikola Vucevic still a really good player, and especially offensively. Like that's where he's contributing is offensively and on the glass. So I think the path to Patrick Williams having more fantasy relevance is going to be with those defensive stats. Yeah, can he get to 1.2 steals and 1.2 blocks? Like how much higher up can he get 1.5 steals and 1.2 blocks? Like he hasn't shown that yet, and that's a massive leap. Like you, no doubt about it. But I think that's kind of where real fantasy value is going to come from him. In my mind, it's probably just going to be more of the same this year, which is like if I'm looking for a final pick of like the last 2 rounds, I probably am looking with somebody or for somebody with more upside. And until Chicago shows a willingness to kind of rebuild or retool their roster instead of just, trying to make things work again, I'm probably going to be pretty out on Patrick Williams. I might take him in the last round, but I think that there's other guys that would go in the last round that I'd be more excited in. But
before we move, just a question on that. So quick ranking, right? Mathurin, Ivy, Williams. 1, 2, 3.
Ivy, Mathurin, Williams for me.
You take Mathurin over Williams, even with his sort of emptier stat skill set?
I think I personally would because I think Mathurin has a path to higher upside. And either way, those two guys are probably going the last 2 rounds. I'd rather take Mathurin, who I think has the upside, whereas Williams, I think he's to the point where we kind of know what he is. Like this is year 5 for him, or year 4.
Year 4, yeah.
Year 4.
He has to take a leap now, man. Like if it's not now, like I don't know. Like I have him in Dynasty, and I think in our league together. And if he doesn't take the leap in the this year and the next year, I don't know, man.
Yeah. And I just think that I've never been super high on Patrick Williams, so I'm trying to not hold that bias against him and trying to be open to maybe he has got better. I think he has, but I think I just see more upside for Mathurin over Patrick Williams' upside. But maybe I'm wrong. But he's their 4th starter. Who is their 5th starter going to be? They have, multiple options they can look at because
Sumnu, Caruso, obviously Javon Carter, and then they have Kobe White, right?
Yeah.
I personally am not interested in any of them in the last round. Like I know a lot of people are keen on Javon Carter, and that's fine, right? He can give steals and assists. And Caruso, obviously, if he gets 25 to 30 minutes, he is going to be relevant for fantasy. But I just don't have confidence in picking which one of these 4 is going to start. Can you make arguments that Caruso can play the 2, 3, 4? Yes, you can. Can you make the argument that Kobe White can be actually a 2? Again, yes, you can. Javon and Desumnu probably the only ones who are predominantly a 1. So we could see that like jumbling up a little bit. But to me, there's too many guys there to make an informed decision in the last round. I would probably avoid them unless one of them stands out in the preseason.
I think I'm right there with you. I want to believe the Javon Carter hype, but I think that there's a real chance that Alex Caruso is too good to come off the bench, in my opinion. Like they could just say we need a traditional point guard, but I wouldn't have an issue if I'm, running the team to have Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan have the ball in their hands the whole time. And I think that's what they did a good bit last year. So why would they go away from that just because Javon Carter's here? Like I think Javon Carter is a very good defender, has some playmaking upside, can get hot from three, as we saw multiple times last year. I'm just hesitant. I don't, like you said, I think Caruso probably has the most fantasy upside among those guys we talked about, but it's just going to be steals. It's going to be, I could pull up his numbers, but like I'm pretty sure the only thing he's really contributing in consistently is 1.5 steals, 0.7 blocks, which I guess isn't bad from a guard, but 2.9 rebounds, 2.9 assists, and 5.6 points. So he's not contributing points at all. So I think if you're looking for steals, but like probably more of a deeper league, I don't know. What do you kind of think on that?
Yeah, I mean, I look at him like I really, first of all, I like Caruso in reality, and I mean, as a player, I think he's one of the best defenders in this league. But yeah, I would just look at him as a steals guy, unless he really puts in like 30-minute games, and then he's clearly standing out to play those minutes there. Then yes, but I don't know if his, if they're able to do that, just given the four people they have, which we just spoke about.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the FBI ADPs right now, and Caruso's going 186 or 186. It just depends because his ADP is 155, but like 186 based on kind of where he's going on average, because there's only that many rounds. But Caruso 186, Javon Carter 191, Kobe White 208, and Dosunmu is 246. So everybody seems to be pretty out on him. And it seems like Caruso is kind of the safest guy. I think if we're looking at who has the most upside, I think it is Javon Carter if he's able to get a starting role, but I'm not buying that necessarily. So I think Caruso is probably the safest option. I think that's the answer I'm going to lock in here. But then the other three guys, probably the only guys that are really guaranteed fantasy relevant, are DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Nikola Vucevic. DeMar was being drafted 48th, Zach LaVine 46th, Vuce 42. So sorry, you're not going to actually be able to stack all three Chicago Bulls on your team probably, because I know that's what it's literally the most popular stack in fantasy basketball. If you haven't heard of this by now, I don't know where you've been getting your fantasy content from. Everybody's trying to stack Chicago Bulls in fantasy hoops. How do we feel about them? Are you taking these guys in the fourth round, which is kind of where they're going? Like, how do we feel about Vooch, who plays a lot of games, but I think his fantasy value kind of comes from the fact that he doesn't really kill you anywhere, and he's a pretty good rebounder. Zach LaVine, who has chronic knee issues, but is one of the most lethal scorers in the league, and DeMar DeRozan, who's aging, but also still one of the most lethal scorers in the league, but doesn't really shoot many threes, I don't know. None of them really give you a ton of defensive stats. How do you feel about them?
Yeah. Firstly, on the stack spot, right? I don't do NFL fantasy. I don't watch it, so I think that it's common there, if I'm not mistaken, doing stacks, right? Is that correct?
Just to be clear, I was totally joking. Nobody's looking to stack the. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is common in fantasy football. Okay, because you started talking about him, I was like, wait. I hope everybody knew I was being sarcastic. Nobody's looking to stack Chicago Bulls.
Oh man, I was like, okay, fair enough. Because I was like, I don't. If you end up with two or three players on the same team, just because there's value in them, I'm happy with that, right? I wouldn't go to four, maybe, but I don't even know if there's four players in any team which you want to get. Maybe Phoenix, but yeah, I mean, okay. So stacks aside, I think in terms of the Chicago Bulls, right? I mean, LaVine probably has a little bit more that he could. I don't know. Does he ramp up a little bit more? I just don't. Does he get a little bit more usage and ball handling, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, like DeRozan and him taking complete ball handling responsibilities with LaVine a little bit more? Is that possible? Vooch, he is safe, man. He is a safe-ish pick, whatever safe can be, right? But I think like where he's going on Fantrax in the 40s, right? I'm not taking him in the 40s. There's other guys in the 40s I would look at. If he gets to me in the 60s, why not? Let's have a crack and see what happens. He's going to return that value. DeRozan as well, I think where he's going, which is 48. I mean, I'd rather around later. I know he gives you a big boost in free throw, and he doesn't hurt you in turnovers. His assists are decent. Doesn't give you any threes, but that's fine. You can find threes later. Again, I would take him around later. So in terms of my rankings or my sort of my projections for them is the right word. I would look at Levine definitely, and then I would look at Vooch in the 60s, and I would look at DeRozan if I can get him in the 50s, and if possible, really, I've seen him go in late 50s in drafts as well, because people are getting off that like that DeRozan sort of hype from a few years ago when he was literally like a second round player for a stretch. Um, so that's how I would look at it. Coming back to what you said earlier on drafting style, right? Like getting younger players and getting a little bit of fun upside in as well. It depends on how you're playing fantasy. If you're a person who likes to watch certain players, and if you really like watching Levine play, then yeah, take him, right? But if you would rather someone else in that, say, like potentially a Jalen Brown who's going around that level, right? Maybe take him, right? So it just depends on everyone's styles as well. That's how I would look at these three guys.
Yeah, I think that's about what it is. Like there's safe options. I think Zach Levine and DeMar are very fun to watch play. Like I'm no doubt about that. I don't know if anybody's dying to turn on League Pass and watch Vooch play, but very solid player. I mentioned Levine's chronic knee issues. He actually played 77 games last year, so I think I need to give him a little bit more credit. I think going into the season, there was reports that he might not play any back-to-backs, but he played 77 games last year, so maybe it's a little bit less of an issue now. Hopefully it stays that way. Hopefully he's able to keep his knees healthy. But yeah, I think where they're going, like their ADPs are all in the second half of the fourth round. I just don't know if I'm taking any of them quite at their ADP. Based on my drafting style, it's just not where I tend to go. I think if I were to take one of the three, actually, I'll ask you, who do you think, if you had to just choose one of the three, who are you taking on your fantasy team?
Levine.
Okay. That's what I was going to say. So
pretty comfortably.
Yeah. I guess it maybe would depend on position, like if I needed a center, but honestly, I'm pretty set on getting my centers past pick 75 this year. Though I think I'm now in on DeAndre Ayton after being out on him the last few years. I think I'm in on DeAndre Ayton. But we'll move on.
Side note, I took him. Yeah, before we go, I took him at 52 in the mock I did a couple of days back. I know Zion was there as well, and I'm big on Zion. Like I think I'm in the community. I'm probably we can talk about it when we do that division. Like I'm probably the highest in Zion, but I took him over Zion. I think he can return top 35, 40 value. But you're right. I would any day pick Ayton over Vooch.
Interesting. And I'm not high on Zion, so that's interesting you said that, but we can save that for that, like you said.
The next one.
We'll wrap up with Cleveland. Yeah, we're making good time here. Pretty good time. Cleveland, I had really high expectations for last year, and they pretty much did the thing during the regular season, finished 51-31, 4th seed in the East, and then kind of collapsed in the playoffs to the Knicks, which I did not see coming at all. Maybe I'm pretty set in my ways when it comes to certain things. And after seeing the Knicks have a really, really good regular season and then just fall flat against the Hawks in the playoffs. But this was a very different Knicks team, and I need to fix my mindset on that. And I think I have after this series. Knicks are good. I'm just going to go ahead and then enough about the Knicks. But Cleveland has their core four with Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. And then this whole I put fourth starter. Dang it. So if you're watching this, that actually is supposed to say fifth, quite obviously, not fourth. But who is going to be the fourth? No, I just freaking read it. I'm going to say who will be the fifth starter for Cleveland alongside their core four. And they added, well, I'll just ask without giving you any multiple choice options. I'll just kind of like let you say who's going to be the fifth starter for Cleveland.
I mean, it has to be Max Strus. I mean, that's the money they've paid him, the role they brought him in as a stretch, theoretically to stretch the floor. It has to be him. Am I interested in him in fantasy? I don't. Again, he's in the same Malik. I know we talked about Malik Beasley earlier. That's how I view him, right? If you want a guy coming in and pop and giving you some threes towards the end of the draft, sure, have a crack at him. there's not much upside there in my opinion. I think I'd rather like leave him on the wire, and then in a week in which I'm behind on threes, I would bring him in then and just just circulate through the wire, because that's how you potentially win leagues. It's not just the people you draft; it's how you win the wire as well. That's how I would look at him in terms of upside. I guess some people can make the argument that it's a weakish one in my opinion, but Okoro or Niang, but to stress like Okoro for defense, Niang has a bigger body potentially, but I think it's Strus, but it does make them a really small team. Like three of those guys are like 6'4" and below. I think Strus is what he's 6'4", is it? Yeah, he will be around there, right? So it does make them a small lineup, but then they do have the twin towers at the back. So yeah, that's another point to note potentially.
Yeah, I think Max Strus, I've been very excited about how it fits for Cleveland since the trade happened. So I think he's going to be their fifth starter. For fantasy, like you said, just really threes. I would consider taking him as a last round pick. Not because I'm super, super high on his upside, but I think he just fits with what they kind of need so well. I think he's a good defender, in my opinion. I don't know. I haven't looked at advanced stats to see if that kind of backs it up, but based on what I've seen, I think he's a very solid defender. And maybe, when you're playing in Miami, you just look like a really good defender, and then you leave Miami and it changes, but we'll see. But I think I'm more excited about that from a basketball standpoint because of his defense that I think is solid, and just being a really good catch and shoot 3-point shooter that's going to command space. I think he fits almost perfectly with kind of what they needed last year. They had a fifth starter that could score and shoot in like Karis LeVert. They had one that could defend in Isaac Okoro. They didn't have one that could really do both, and I think they finally have that in Max Strus. So I'm excited about that, and I may end up taking him in the last round of a draft as a flyer, but as far as overall fantasy upside, it's probably not necessarily there because he's probably going to even see probably less shot attempts with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland there. But I'm very excited about how that fits. But more importantly for fantasy is how good can Evan Mobley be this year after – I'm trying to remember. I think he finished 78th during his rookie season in 9-cap value, and he may, if I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Yeah, he finished better. He finished 53rd last year. Really good rebounder and really good shot blocker, high field goal percentage. Still playing alongside Jarrett Allen, which I think, we could probably talk about a little bit alongside that with this. How good can Evan Mobley be this year, knowing he's still kind of the power forward, not necessarily – he's not the center. He's sharing the floor with another 7-footer all the time.
Yeah, and that's the pressure point there, right? Like what happens with Jarrett Allen, right? Because we saw, as you mentioned earlier in this, that the Knicks, obviously, it was a disappointment for the Cavs losing to the Knicks, right? And the way they lost, and Allen's play there, and his sort of comments after that as well. Is he a trade candidate? Potentially, yes, right? Because obviously Mobley is the center of their future. Like that's clear to anyone who's watching basketball, right? So if he does get like more minutes at the 5, I could see his blocks come up. I could see his rebounds come up. I could see his because he's a versatile big. He is I think he's a generational defender. Like he has a potential to be a generational defender. I'm going to say that in his prime, right? He has that Kevin Garnett or Anthony Davis. By no means, again, he's not going to be them, but he has that kind of defensive chops like that he can potentially put out in his prime. And I feel blocks, rebounds. Another thing, I know this is low volume, but his 3-point percentage last year was like, I think it was 20-odd%, 21%, right? He shot, I think, 30% in college. Can he potentially stretch the floor a little bit more? Can he get maybe half an attempt more? See what happens, right? You have Strus there now as well. But that one I'm not as confident in as I am potentially for his blocks and rebounds as a center. And the other thing, just to note before I pass it back to you, is they did bring Niang in, right? And Niang will play the 4. And in those lineups, you're going to have Mobley potentially at the 5. Right? You could make the argument Allen can also play at the 5 there because Niang is a shooter. But you would have Mobley as the 5 lineups coming up more as well. So I do feel that there is potential, but I don't think he's going to be a top. It's a little tricky for me to see him being a top 20, top 25 guy. There is a pathway to maybe like top 30, top 35, something like that if he gets his blocks and rebounds up. But his top 20 upside, which some people have, like I don't know if I'm there yet. And I had him in like a bunch of leagues last year. I got him in the 50s and 60s, and I was okay with it.
Yeah, I think the top 20s is going to come when Jared Allen's gone. I don't think that they're going to be able to do this whole 2 7-footer thing in the modern NBA where Evan Mobley, like you said, he shot 21.6% from three last year. Like he's shot over one per game, so it's not like he's scared to shoot him. Jared Allen's not shooting any threes, but he's not a stretch four by any means. But I think he can get to a point where it's like, okay, like we can at least respect him to the point where we're not going to want him shooting wide open threes the way they may let a guy like Jared Allen do that. But I think that the true fantasy boom happens when Jared Allen's gone. I don't think that happens this year, unfortunately. His ADP in FBI leagues is 39, and I think that almost is to the point where it's any upside that he has with Jared Allen still there, Donovan Mitchell there, is kind of limited past 39. Like you said, like 30s is probably going to be very difficult for him to get to because he'd have to probably he averaged 9 rebounds last year. Could he get that to 10? Like he averaged a block and a half. How much more can he get with another 7-footer down there rebounding and blocking shots? So I love Evan Mobley long-term. I think I'm a little higher on him in my dynasty ranks than some other dynasty guys are. And there was, when I think I did my initial ones a few months ago, I had him, I think, ranked at 11. I think I brought him down a little bit, but I really love his upside. I just think it's not happening yet. So this year, I think I'm a little bit hesitant to take him if I'm having to burn what would that be, an early 4th round pick on him, a top 40 pick on him. I think long-term, really, really good. This year, I'm not as all in as I probably was even last year, where I was very high on him. And now the ADP is kind of caught up, and I'm not as excited about taking him at 39. But the last topic of this episode will be, does Karis LeVert hold any value? He's probably going to end up as the 6th man with Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell starting in the backcourt with Max Strus at the 3 is my guess, our guess, your guess. Karis LeVert's probably going to be the 6th man. Is that a good spot for him to have some value? Is that a spot for him to be worth maybe a late round pick?
Yes. So there's obviously the concept of handcuffing, right, which doesn't work most of the times because in the NBA, right, in terms of fantasy. But there are certain players this year which I feel in a mold of they do fit that broad definition of picking them based on that, right? So for example, LeVert, yeah, as you said, he's gonna play like 29 minutes maybe off the bench easily, right? Because remember, Rubio's situation is a little uncertain at the moment as well, and they don't have like who is the other guy? Ty Jerome. They do have Imani Bates, if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's obviously, but he's not a point guard. So yeah, it is LeVert coming off the bench, right? And I think if you have a Garland or a Mitchell earlier on in your draft, and you're coming to the last pick, you could take LeVert because he's going to give you back end value anyways, even with them there. He's going to give you top 140-ish value anyways. And if for any reason Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland miss time, he slots straight in. And then he could give you top 80, top 90 value. We've seen that. Not to the extent of peak Brooklyn Karis LeVert, but he'll give you top 90, right? And he has shown an ability to ramp up his assists as well when he's given the opportunity. He's a decent passer. So I'm all for him in the last round, with some value like in the current sense as well in his current role. And I'd be happy to take him. Another guy like in the same mold, which is in the Pacific Division, is Christian Wood. Like he'll play 22, 23 minutes, and he's going to give you standard league value in that. And if Davis goes down, he comes in a top 80 player. Same logic for LeVert, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I'm probably a little bit. I agree with the concept of, when Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland misses a game or two here or there. like definitely a guy that you want on your roster during that time. I think I'm just a little bit more hesitant on having him as a guy that's going to hold standard value. And maybe that's just the way I'm looking at him. But I think to me, he's more like what you were saying about Max Strus, where he's a guy that's like, I think he's going to play good minutes. I think he'll be able to score. He probably does a little bit more than Strus does, but I don't see him giving real standard league value, in my opinion, as just a sixth man. And I think he'll still be a good contributor for them, but I think this goes maybe back to more of like a drafting philosophy of I'm looking for somebody that has a lot of upside over the last 2 rounds. And I think Levert's upside is only there if somebody in front of him suffers a really big injury. Yeah. Like I think it would have to be like a long-term injury, not like just like a couple games here and there. Yeah, we know, but I'm saying like if Mitchell or Darius Garland were to end up missing like a month or 2, then yeah, I think Levert has a lot of value during that. Probably more so Mitchell than Garland, because I don't think that they would roll with Garland and Mitchell Mitchell and Levert as their starting backcourt for a really long period of time. I think they'd probably go with a more traditional point guard. But all that to be said, I don't think that I would spend a late round pick on Caris Levert. I would look at him as more of a waiver wire guy. I think that's kind of what I meant when you said about Max Strus, the guy to like let sit on your waiver wire, and then when you need him or see the opportunity for him, then pick him up. More so than a guy that I'd burn a late round pick on.
Yeah, I'm okay with that as well, because it's the last round guy is a waiver wire guy, because if you don't like him after the first 2-3 weeks, he's gone, right? You get someone else in. One thing, so the 4 guys we talked about, right? Levert, Malik Beasley, Max Strus, and potentially Javon Carter, right? How would you look at all 4 of them if you had to pick in the last round right now?
Sorry, you said Malik Beasley, Max Strus, Javon Carter, and who was the other one?
Levert.
Levert,
I think I've got your answer. You're going to leave him for the wire, but the other 3.
I think Beasley. I think I'd go Beasley. Assuming that something comes out saying he's going to be the starter, but I think he could end up playing more of an important role for them than maybe was initially thought. And I think that having his shooting in the starting unit alongside a bunch of other guys that can shoot the ball, obviously, but except Giannis, I think that he has a good bit of upside. I mean, he was awesome for the Jazz last year and then just couldn't figure it out in LA. I think he's who I'd go with.
Yeah, fair. All 4 of them are really close for me. I think I just have potentially I'd have Strus a level lower just threes. But yeah, I mean, I'm okay with any of those 4 on the wire. I'm okay with any of those 4 in the last round.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for our Central Division breakdown. Karan, I guess before we go, what do you have kind of coming up? I guess it's preseason starts next week, and then we have regular season a few weeks after that. Do you have any exciting content that we should be looking out for coming up, or just where can we get in contact with you to keep up with your work?
So yeah, just follow me on the Twitter handle listed there, and yeah, just we're going to ramp up stuff obviously at FBI, right? And as you know as well, in terms of the leagues and everything. For me personally, some of the content I'm going to be putting out is in my articles as well. So I'm looking at some regression candidates for this year in terms of both positive and negative in terms in for shooting. And I'm going to put out an article on that in the coming days. And I'm looking at getting articles out once a week, sometimes more than that, but definitely once a week. That's what I'm doing. And in terms of working with the guys for podcasts as well, we'll probably have a few more coming up in the next few days, in the next few weeks leading up to draft season, potentially mocks as well. I don't know. We were talking about that. We could do some mocks as well. So it's really ramping up. This is obviously the busiest time for all of us.
Yeah, definitely. Well, look, man, thank you for joining me. I guess this is your FBI debut pod, but man, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining me, Karan.
Thanks for having me, Noah.
Yeah. All right. So that wraps up episode 27. As a reminder, follow Karan on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. If you're watching it, it's at NoRuben22. If you're listening to it, subscribe to my Substack, noruben.substack.com. Like, rate, review this podcast. Check out fantasybasketballinternational.com. Follow their Twitter as well. All the content plugs I could possibly think of off the top of my head, I'm just going to throw them out there right now. NBA season's coming up. We're getting really excited about everything that we're putting out, and we're excited to dive into some leagues. I don't have any World Cup announcement, which is probably, this is the first FBI podcast in a while without anything about that, but we're all excited for that. And I think that's going to do it for this episode. So thanks for listening.
You just listened to another episode from the Fantasy Basketball International Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us. And for more information about joining our community, please check out our website at fbibasketball.com.